Well, welcome. I'm Bob Edison with the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, and with me is my friend and colleague Chuck Huckleberry, our Pima County Administrator. And we're very pleased you could be with us today as we take a look at the history of the museum over the past 54 years and bring you up to date on the future goals, programs, and endeavors that the museum has for the community as we move into the next 50 years.
The Sonoran Desert is a very unique place on this planet. In fact, it is something that needs to be studied and examined and conserved to the best we can. People who live in the desert need to learn about it, need to understand it, and I think that there's no better place to do that than at the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum.
The very heart of the Desert Museum has always been and continues to be public education to help inspire people to live in harmony with the natural world. And we really enjoy the partnership we have with Pima County as we look back over the past 54 years. Many people don't realize that the county has different properties, including museum and cultural institutions, as part of its network.
Yes, Bob. Education, fairgrounds, the Rito racetrack, other facilities in Pima County, but I think when we look back at it, the world-class attraction is right here. It's the Sonoran Desert Museum.
Chuck and I, as well as the staff of the museum, want to thank Channel 13 for their work on this project. And now we encourage you to sit back and enjoy the history of the Desert Museum.
It was Labor Day 1952. On that date, the city of Tucson boasted 45,000 residents. In downtown Tucson, Levy's, Steinfeld's, and Hockamy's department stores, Ronstadt Hardware, and 3 variety stores, Woolworth's, McClellan's, and S.H. Kress, were in business. The Pioneer Hotel advertised 250 rooms of solid comfort and boasted it was fireproof. The Fox Theater was showing Ginger Rogers in Dreamboat. Out in the desert at Speedway in Wilmot, Ernie Molina's service station was the last chance for those headed for Sabino Canyon or Mount Lemmon to obtain gas, priced at an average of 28 cents a gallon. Enrollment at the University of Arizona was $5,500. Montgomery Ward's was selling men's dress shoes for $4.88. The Sunset Dairy made home deliveries, and the only television programs came from a single Phoenix station. It was on Labor Day in 1952 that the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum opened with crowds of visitors who arrived amid the billowing dust that arose from the unpaved Gates Pass and Kinney Roads. It had been a year earlier when Easterner transplants turned Tucsonians William H. Carr and Arthur N. Pack fortuitously met at a meeting of the Pima County Parks Commission. The topic of discussion that night was the future of some classic southwestern but termite-infested buildings known as the Tucson Mountain House, located in the Tucson Mountain Park, 12 miles west of Tucson. That evening in 1951, Bill Carr proposed using the Mountain House facility for an outdoor living museum, such as he had established years earlier at Bear Mountain State Park trailside museums and nature trails in the state of New York. After some heated rhetoric, permission was granted.
Here was a magnificent area of desert, sky, and mountain to understand, appreciate, and interpret for all who came this way.
Bill Carr drew up plans. Arthur Pack obtained funding. The two founders were joined by 2 teenagers, 5 shovel-bearing workers, and enthusiastic volunteers. Work at the site began April 1st, 1952, and after a frantically busy and torrid desert summer, the museum opened to a huge crowd on Labor Day, September 1st, 1952. 2 men, an idea, and buildings located in a magnificent desert setting united to ultimately produce the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. And as Tucson has grown into a unique city of the Southwest, so too has the Desert Museum evolved into a world-renowned institution that interprets the Sonoran Desert and adjacent ecosystems of the southwestern United States and northwestern Mexico. Although the wording of the Desert Museum's mission has been rephrased from time to time, the basic purpose and goals of the museum have remained constant. The mission of the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum is to inspire people to live in harmony with the natural world by fostering love, appreciation, and understanding of the Sonoran Desert.
From the day of its opening, the Desert Museum's reputation has been built upon. It's offering a desert experience which is intimate, direct, personal, and unhurried.
Bill Carr and Arthur Pack received permission to use the buildings of Tucson Mountain House Complex in early 1952. When they came out here, what they found was a handsome building that had been built by the CCC under the direction of the National Park System, but it had never been used by the national parks. It had been used as a restaurant, a camping place, a place for picnics primarily, so that when Bill Carr came, the building was in disrepair, the termites had moved in, and there was a lot of work to be done. Nevertheless, within 6 months, the Desert Museum opened its doors on Labor Day and had a crowd. The parking lot was small and dusty. The facility itself consisted of the main building, which had a small animal room, and its primary inhabitants were reptiles. The opposite room in the main building had a small mineral collection, and certainly that has grown tremendously over the years. In February of that year, we received the museum's foremost resident, and that was George L. Mountain Lion. Bill Carr had obtained a mountain lion, a sort of a teenage mountain lion, from someone in California, and he came on a plane. He arrived at the museum on George Washington's birthday, and hence he was named George. Bill Carr added the initial L for Leo, and so he became George L. Mountain Lion. He was a wonderful animal. He was a real sweetheart. He could be taken for walks on the grounds. He loved to have his chin scratched through the wire of the enclosure by his friends, his keepers out here at the museum. And when happy, he purred a resonant purr. George was a literate lion in that he wrote a column for the Arizona Daily Star, a weekly column which detailed things that were going on at the museum and talked about desert plants and animals. We no longer walk mountain lions on the grounds. Things have changed greatly. The museum has grown tremendously, but our goal has never changed, which has always been to promote respect and love for the natural world around us.
I came out before the museum opened during the summer of 1952, and we were all working hard, doing odd jobs, trying to get it ready for opening on Labor Day. I think it fulfilled a need. People come out here; they've heard so many stories of the critters in the area, and there's no way to see them. There's no place to see them. That's what attracted people here. This was one place where you could see it at one whack, as it were, the major wildlife of the area. It was a lot smaller, but the main elements were there.
The main exhibit was down behind me here, down a main trail, and they were all concrete, made to look like adobe, chain link. We had probably 10 or 15 different animals in those cages, and then we had, the reptiles were here at that time.
They were here in the early stages, and the invertebrates.
And the invertebrates.
Yeah, centipedes and scorpions.
It was nothing compared to, of course, what the museum is now.
And Merv here was the one who conceived the idea of having a museum-type diorama, but with live animals.
I got the idea that if we're going to do this right, let's put the animals in a native-looking habitat, including the background painting, because people can learn a lot about where the animal lives and what it feeds on by just looking at the enclosure. I think in the final analysis, the museum played a major role in taking animals out of standard enclosures and putting them in a habitat, because people did not want to see an animal behind chain link.
We developed a material called Invisinet. It's a fine gauge stainless steel cable netting knotted by hand, and it was designed to contain animals reliably but out in the desert, so that it looks like there's no barrier between the visitor and the animal, but they are safely contained. We've tried to consider what the animal's psychological and behavioral needs might be and include for that or provide for that. It's added a lot to the visitor's enjoyment because they get to see more behaviors on the part of the animal, but it's also done a lot for the animals.
It is not what is found at the Desert Museum alone which has earned its reputation, so much as the manner in which it all is presented.
One of the main aims of the museum is education. We went out and visited other institutions who already had educational programs going. After we'd had a few summers with local talent teaching, we finally made it a department and hired a person to run it, because we felt we needed to outreach the school children and do a better job working with the people on the grounds, which started the docent program as well.
One of the most important and popular programs we had was the Desert Ark, which was invented by Hal Gross and went on for many years. Hal would go in his station wagon, which Joseph would christen the Desert Ark, with animals to all the schools. And this was an extremely popular program, and Hal Gross really became a representative of the Desert Museum. We also had our weekly television program, which was first live and later recorded, thank goodness.
Howdy, ladies and gentlemen. This is Hal Gross welcoming you to the 533rd in our series of Arizona Desert Trails television programs of the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum.
Hal hosted the museum's informal TV program, which featured a variety of animal and human guests. The first program was presented in October 1953, and over the next 32 years, the weekly program aired 1,551 times. Hal was a Desert Noah, for he developed the Desert Ark program, and Hal Gross and the Desert Ark became synonymous terms. Hal and the animals he carried in his Desert Ark station wagon visited schools, service clubs, fairs, and celebrations of all types where, while presenting and talking about the Ark animals, he brought a message of compassion for animals and conservation of their desert world. For 14 years, La Vega, the Ark's ringtail, demonstrated trust while innumerable children touched and petted her. And in every program, held atop a child's head by Hal, with her tail draped downward, she became a Davy Crockett hat for an immensely pleased child picked from the audience. Thanks to Hal, more than one famous and often very surprised adult member of the audience also wore her, including Barry Goldwater, Joe Garagiola, and Gary Moore. Hal's cornball wit brought as many laughs from adults as children. His javelinas bore such names as Gregory Peccary, Olivia de Javelina, Zsa Zsa Labor, and Francis Bacon. The snake was Julius Squeezer, and the skunks, Chlorophyll or Chlorophyllus, dependent of course upon sex.
Admittedly, Hal is a showman, and stagecraft and putting porcupines on a first-name basis is only a tool for making the desert instantly interesting and eminently worth safeguarding.
Over a period of 31 years, Hal presented a total of 5,382 Desert Ark programs in locations ranging from Tucson schools to the White House, and wore out 6 station wagons, all donated by the Tucson community. At the time of Hal's death, an adult who fondly remembered this Desert Noah from his childhood exposures to the Desert Ark program simply stated, "He spoke to the animals, and at times it seemed as if they spoke back."
The public who visit the museum, support the museum, are members of the museum, have grown to expect a very high level of excellence in all that we do. It's why we strive to create real authenticity about all of the information and interpretive work that is done here at the museum, so that it's not only trusted, but becomes the leading voice on the Sonoran Desert in the world.
We're a very complex organization. For most of our visitors, we're a world-renowned zoo and botanical garden, but for the conservation community here in the Southwest, we're a key player in conservation issues in southwestern U.S. and northwestern Mexico. For the education community, we're a critical player with our educational outreach programs, which touch 40 to 50,000 students every year. So we're a very complicated institution, and that's part of our strength, I think. The living collections continue to grow annually, of course. At the current time, we probably have well over 30,000 specimens of plants and well over 10,000 specimens of animals, and these represent about 300 species of animals and about 1,000 species of plants, many of which, of course, are threatened and endangered species, and we hold those with cooperative programs with Arizona Game and Fish and the National Fish and Wildlife Service.
One of our greatest strengths is the combination of our paid staff and volunteer corps. We have nearly 200 docents and 300 volunteers that give their time and knowledge, and one of the most talented, dedicated staffs that we've both ever worked with.
The Arizona Sonora Desert Museum is the best demonstration of the value of enthusiasm we have ever personally encountered. The institution is truly a monument to mass enthusiasm on the part of many people who found and still find a welcome outlet for their talents and interests in the type of community project our museum represents.
Approximately 500 docents and volunteers donate their time and energy to the Desert Museum, talking to visitors, giving presentations about animals, plant and ecological relationships, as well as helping behind the scenes in all types of tasks and conducting outreach programs. Annually, volunteer groups provide approximately 130,000 hours of assistance to the museum, or the equivalent of 65 full-time employees.
In fact, there are so many of them, you couldn't swing a saguaro rib without hitting a docent.
Docents are involved in interpreting natural history of the Sonoran Desert to a wide variety of our visitors out on grounds. Docents all begin to go through a vigorous docent training program, and it typically runs for 15 weeks. It's a really unique opportunity where we have a small class setting and we pull our expert curators to teach the classes and our education team to talk about interpretive techniques and Sonoran Desert natural history. Our docents are our frontline interpreters. They are really a key component. They're part of the museum experience, and the museum would be a very different place without our docent program.
Education was, is, and always will be a major goal of the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum. From its very beginning, the museum has hosted classes of students from preschool through the university level. More than 25,000 students in organized school groups visit the museum annually. Formal classes for young people at the museum were initiated in 1967 and have been expanding ever since. And our education specialists take presentations, such as the Desert Ark and Reptile program, to schools throughout Tucson and adjoining areas. Additionally, special events and programs are sponsored on the museum grounds to provide information, education, and involvement for visitors.
A big part of what we bring to the schools and do here on grounds as well is teach people about the critters that we share the desert with. There's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of fear sometimes about the desert. So what our hope is that by meeting these animals and sometimes plants, those folks will learn a little bit more about them and won't be so afraid or a little bit nervous about them, and that they'll start to really love them and care about them.
When you visit the museum, you're not just visiting a desert museum, you're actually visiting the desert. So you're immersed in the desert. About 85% of the plants and animals are actually outdoors, and so you definitely get a full flavor of what it's like to be in the Sonoran Desert. Being out here is a very different experience than some of the city zoos that you might find where you're trying to suspend disbelief. Here you don't have to because you're actually out in the desert.
Our training here at the Desert Museum for all of the animals is really focused on their natural behaviors. The Raptor Free Flight program was started as an alternative method to demonstrate raptors or birds of prey. Rather than watching birds in an exhibit, we actually have them flying free in the desert where our visitors can watch them behave as though they had just come upon a wild bird. Some of the birds that we have in the program include barn owls, ferruginous hawks. We do have a few non-raptor birds like ravens and roadrunners, and then the real showcase species is our family of Harris hawks.
Live and on the Loose is actually the brainchild of one of our staff. We were trying to figure out how we can actually present venomous reptiles to the public that engages them and gives them information about the natural history of these animals, which goes a long way to get people to understand what they do for a living, which is typically not what people expect. These days with television programs, quite often people expect that snakes are out there looking for you to bite, and that's quite the contrary. So having these animals in a safe setting and actually having it where people can look at these animals fairly close up gives them a very different perspective on what they're really about.
So the Desert Ark is the vehicle that we use, that's behind me, to take our animals out into the community, out to schools and senior centers and all kinds of different places. About 5 years ago, the Burt W. Martin Foundation and Red Acre Farms helped to kick off a new generation of outreach in the schools and helped to sponsor this vehicle as well. So because of them, we're going out now and seeing lots and lots of kids and other folks in the community bringing creatures like our ringtail out to the Tucson and greater vicinity.
In the interpretive animal collection, and that's a group of animals that we use on grounds, our docents take the animals out to share with the visitors, as well as there are animals that we take on outreach programs to schools and other events. Those animals include tarantulas and scorpions and snakes, but also birds. We have parrots and raptors like owls and hawks. And we also have a few small mammals, our ringtails and coatis, that we take to schools.
The science department, which is now part of the Center for Sonoran Desert Studies, has the primary role of overseeing the scientific aspects of the museum's operations. We teach docents, we oversee the correctness of technical publications that we put out, and we conduct research when we can. We recently combined the former education and research and conservation departments into the Center for Sonoran Desert Studies. The purpose of doing that was to get the education people and the research people closer together so that we could really do better work. We can help, as a scientist, I can be helpful to the education department, And we need education specialists to put out what we know about science to the general public, because we want more than just scientists to know about what we do.
How many people does it take to make the Desert Museum run smoothly? More than you think. At last count, it was a staff of 140, including animal keepers, gardeners, security, food services, administrators, maintenance workers, educators, scientists, veterinarians, designers and planners, computer techs, warehouse, purchasing, guest services, and membership personnel. There's a busy world behind the scenes at the Desert Museum.
In the Department of Mammalogy and Ornithology, we currently have 50 species of bird and 25 species of mammal. And individuals, about 170 individual birds and 85 mammals currently, which is a lot of work.
The Botany Department has 8 members. 5 horticulturists take care of this roughly 20 acres of grounds out here. It's a full-time job to keep it looking good. We have different standards of care. Some of our gardens are called excellent care gardens, that we want them looking perfect all the time. If a plant dies, it gets taken out and replaced right away. The habitat gardens are perhaps an opposite extreme. A branch breaks, if it's not a hazard, we leave a broken branch, a dead plant in place, because that's what you could see out in a habitat.
And at the Desert Museum, we have definitely had many animals who have longevity records that other institutions may not have. Half of it is just our setting. It's wonderful to display indigenous species, but then also the wonderful care our animals get.
And this low water use concept in horticulture, in gardening, is something that the Desert Museum has been involved in since its start, essentially, and really helped get word out to Tucson and Arizona and the Southwest.
I think one of our most popular exhibits is our hummingbird exhibit. It's such a wonderful exhibit because you get to go inside with these animals, and I don't think many people realize just how tenacious these birds are and how hardy they are.
And all of our entire Desert Museum staff is very attuned to on-site impromptu education, and I'm proud of the Botany Department especially for taking care to educate the children and all the visitors.
Having such a strong commitment to our animals from acquisition to their final disposition, it's really wonderful to work for an institution who has that sort of commitment.
The new theater and education building provide us with opportunities to extend our visitor programs into the warmer, hotter months of the year, offer opportunities for symposia, education meetings, and conferences, and serve as rental space for special programs after hours and on weekends. The Warden Oasis Theater allows for all of these things and actually much more. It's a state-of-the-art facility that seats nearly 300 people. Our new education building houses our new Art Institute, a program that has realized much success since its formal founding approximately 6 years ago. There are currently about 750 active students in the Art Institute today, taking classes associated with the conservation work of the museum, associated with fine art.
It was part of the original vision of the founders of the Desert Museum that we would interpret the Sea of Cortez through what they called Gulf Hall, which would be an exhibit on the Gulf of California. It's been a long time coming, but we're now beginning to formulate some plans to talk about how we can interpret the Sea of Cortez through creation of a Gulf Hall.
We hope this fall to open our new Life on the Rocks exhibit, which has been underway for many years because of how complicated and complex this particular endeavor is. Where mixed species who reside in rocky crevices will be exhibited together, and along with it will be a new project for children.
The animals are ambassadors for their kind in the world of humans, and the Desert Museum is their embassy.
The costs associated with operating an institution of this magnitude are significant. We estimate that it's about $19,000 a day in costs to operate the Desert Museum. Most of that, of course, is derived through what we call earned income, fees at the gate, the money that people spend in food and beverage and in the gift shops. But much of it is also contributed income, money from donors and money from memberships. We have one of the largest memberships of its kind in the area. Nearly 23,000 households are supporting members of the museum, and that grows each day, both as a result of the Tucson community in southern Arizona growing, but also grows because as more and more people visit the museum, visit the website, learn about the work of the museum. They want to support the important conservation efforts of the museum.
The Desert Museum promotes appreciation, understanding, and love for our Sonoran Desert. For to have known well one desert or one mountain, river, or animal is to value it as part of our natural world. And value it we must for the sustenance, hope, and joy it provides us. We urge you to join us as a member of the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum and to participate in creative stewardship, compassionate care, and intelligent action to protect and preserve the Sonoran Desert and all other parts of our natural world.
The Desert Museum is devoted to life, to the interpretation of living forms, to the conservation of life.
As Tucson has grown in the last half-century, so too has the Desert Museum. The museum staff today numbers 140. The number of exhibits has grown tremendously, and approximately 500,000 people visit the museum annually. In 2002, the Desert Museum celebrated its 50th anniversary. How do you envision the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum at its 100th anniversary?
I think what the Desert Museum will be in another 100 years is probably one of the most meaningful educational centers of its kind in the world.
It will be widely expanded in many ways in education. I'm sure a great expansion there. Exhibit-wise, there are always new ideas and processes coming along, new computer-age stuff that will be incorporated into the exhibits.
It's just hard to imagine with the improvement in digital technology and everything just what will happen, but I'm sure it'll be lots.
One of the most unique aspects of the Desert Museum is the fact that we focus on a single ecosystem in a single region and interpret the plants, animals, and geology of that region. And that will probably always attract people to the museum, and there will always be a need to understand your sense of place.
We hope you enjoyed the show, Treasure the Desert, here at the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, one of Pima County's major attractions.
And for more information on how you and your family can become involved with the museum or even become members, please contact us through one of the websites listed on your screen. And from all of us here at the Desert Museum, thanks for being with us.